I thought I was just another conquest for billionaire Richard Hayes, a poor black girl he could use and discard. But when I discovered the twisted empire he built on stolen dreams and buried secrets, I became the one thing he never expected, his biggest nightmare. This is how I brought him down. If you've ever felt powerless against someone with money and influence, stay with me. This story will show you that truth is the ultimate weapon, and sometimes the hunted becomes the hunter. Hit that subscribe button because you won't believe what happens next. I'm sitting in this courtroom right now, watching the man who almost destroyed my life being led away in handcuffs. Richard Hayes, billionaire, predator, and the most dangerous man I've ever loved. His expensive suit can't hide what he really is anymore. The media is calling it the trial of the century, but for me, it's just the end of a nightmare that started 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I was nobody special, just another single black mother trying to make it in a world that seemed designed to keep me down. Today, I'm the woman who brought down America's most powerful predator. And let me tell you, it wasn't luck that got me here. It was pure survival instinct, and the kind of rage that only comes when someone threatens your child. Let me take you back to where this all started. Picture this. Me, Maya Johnson, 28 years old, working double shifts at a downtown restaurant while studying business online after my daughter went to bed. I was exhausted most days, surviving on coffee and determination, living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that cost more than it was worth. My daughter Lily was everything to me. This bright, curious 8-year-old who never complained about our hand-me-down furniture or the fact that dinner sometimes came from the dollar menu. I was building something for us, one class at a time, one paycheck at a time. The night everything changed was supposed to be just another catering gig, some fancy charity event at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the kind of place where people spent more on wine than I made in a month. I was in my black uniform, invisible to most of the guests as I served champagne and tiny appetizers with names I couldn't pronounce. That's when I saw him across the room. Richard Hayes didn't look like the monster the newspapers call him now. He looked like salvation wrapped in a custom suit. He approached me while I was clearing glasses, and instead of treating me like the help, he asked my name. Not just asked, he listened, really listened. When I told him I was studying business, his eyes lit up like I'd said something brilliant. "Intelligence is the sexiest thing about a woman," he said, and God help me, I believed every word. Within a week, he was sending flowers to my apartment. Within a month, he was flying me to Paris for dinner. Can you imagine? A woman who'd never been on a plane suddenly sipping wine above the clouds with a man who owned 3 of them. But even in those early days, something felt off. Richard asked too many questions about my past, my family, my dreams. He wanted to know everything: where I grew up, who my friends were, what scared me most. I thought it was romantic attention. I thought he was fascinated by me. Looking back, I realize he was studying me like a scientist studies a lab rat, figuring out exactly which buttons to push to make me dance to his tune. Within 3 months, Richard had completely rewritten my reality. One day, I'm counting quarters for bus fare. The next, I'm living in a penthouse that overlooks the entire city. He moved me and Lily into his world, like we were missing pieces of his perfect puzzle. The apartment had marble floors that echoed when Lily ran through the hallways, and windows so tall you felt like you were floating above everyone else's problems. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. I wasn't calculating how many hours I needed to work to keep the lights on. Richard introduced me to Hayes Industries like he was showing off a crown jewel. Tech companies, real estate empires, pharmaceutical research. This man had his fingers in everything that mattered. He took me to board meetings where people twice my age hung on his every word. "Maya has incredible business instincts," he'd tell them, and I felt 10 feet tall. Here was someone who saw my potential when the rest of the world saw me as just another struggling single mum. But success has a way of making you forget to ask the right questions. I was so busy being grateful, so busy trying to fit into this new life that I missed the signs. Richard's employees didn't just respect him, they feared him. When he walked into a room, conversation stopped. When he left, people exhaled like they'd been holding their breath. His assistant Angela had worked for him for 8 years, and I never once saw her make eye contact with him. She'd deliver his coffee, accept his instructions, and disappear like smoke. The strangest part was how my old life started falling away without me even noticing. Friends stopped calling. My mother became distant during our weekly phone calls. Even Lily seemed different, quieter, more careful around Richard. I told myself it was just adjustment, that we were all learning how to live in this new world. But deep down, something was whispering that this paradise came with a price I hadn't seen yet. The first time I truly felt afraid was on a Tuesday night in October. I woke up around 2 in the morning because Lily was having nightmares again, and I heard Richard talking on the phone in his study. The door was cracked open, just enough for me to catch fragments of his conversation. "The situation needs to be handled permanently," he was saying in a voice I'd never heard before. Cold, businesslike, terrifying. "I don't care what it costs. Some problems don't solve themselves." I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. When he finally hung up, I rushed back to bed and pretended to be asleep. The next morning, Richard was his usual charming self, bringing me coffee and asking about my plans for the day. But I couldn't shake what I'd heard, and I couldn't stop wondering who needed to be handled permanently. That's when I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. Richard's computer was always locked, but he kept files in his home office that weren't password protected. One afternoon while he was at a meeting, I found myself standing in front of his filing cabinet. My hands were shaking as I opened the first drawer. What I found changed everything. There were files on me, thick manila folders with my name, Lily's name, my mother's information, bank records, school transcripts, medical histories, even photos of us that I'd never seen before. Pictures of me at work, walking Lily to school, grocery shopping. Someone had been watching us long before Richard ever approached me at that charity event. The most chilling part was a psychological profile that analyzed my vulnerabilities and pressure points. It read like a manual for how to manipulate me. When I confronted Richard that evening, he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned it around on me. "Maya, sweetheart, you're being paranoid," he said with that patronizing smile I was starting to hate. "I'm a businessman. I research everyone in my life. It's just good sense." He made me feel crazy for being upset, like I was overreacting to something perfectly normal. That night, after Richard fell asleep, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I was going to find out exactly who the man I was living with really was. I started small, searching his name online in ways I'd never bothered to before. Not the polished Forbes articles or business profiles, but digging deeper into forums, old news articles, anywhere someone might have mentioned Richard Hayes in passing. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a pattern, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Over the past 10 years, at least 6 women had been linked to Richard romantically. All of them had similar backgrounds to mine. Single mothers, working class, ambitious but vulnerable. And every single one of them had disappeared from public life after their relationship with him ended. Not just disappeared, destroyed. There was Carmen, a nurse from Detroit, who dated Richard 3 years ago. After they broke up, she lost her job due to misconduct, her nursing license was revoked, and she eventually moved back to her hometown, where she now works at a grocery store. Then there was Aisha, a teacher from Philadelphia, who suddenly had criminal charges filed against her for embezzlement. Charges that were later dropped, but not before her career was ruined. The more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. But the worst discovery came when I started looking into Hayes Industries' pharmaceutical division. Richard had been using his wealth and connections to test experimental drugs on poor communities, particularly targeting areas with large Black and Latino populations. These weren't approved clinical trials. They were illegal human experiments disguised as free medical care. People were getting sick, and when they tried to speak out, they found themselves facing lawsuits they couldn't afford or worse. The night I found the medical records, I sat in Richard's bathroom with my laptop, reading testimonies from families whose loved ones had died after receiving these experimental treatments. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just Richard's girlfriend, I was his next victim, and he'd been planning my destruction from the moment he saw me serving champagne at that charity event. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Richard had judges on his payroll, cops who owed him favors, and enough money to make any accusations disappear. But I had something he didn't expect. Those business classes I'd been taking weren't just about marketing and management. I'd learned how to follow money trails, how to spot financial irregularities, and most importantly, how to document everything properly. I started recording our conversations using an app on my phone. Every dinner, every casual chat, every time he bragged about his deals, I was building a case. The hardest part was acting normal, pretending I still loved him while my skin crawled every time he touched me. But I had to protect Lily, and the only way out was through. I reached out to the other women, Carmen, Aisha, and 3 others I'd found through my research. At first, they were terrified to talk to me. Who could blame them? Richard had already destroyed their lives once. But when I shared what I'd discovered about the illegal drug trials, something clicked. We weren't just individual victims anymore. We were witnesses to a criminal empire that was still hurting people. The breakthrough came when I was analyzing Richard's business accounts using everything I'd learned in my finance classes. Hidden in the pharmaceutical division's books, I found something that made my heart stop. Richard wasn't just testing illegal drugs. He was laundering money for international crime syndicates through fake medical research programs. Millions of dollars were flowing through Hayes Industries from sources in Eastern Europe and South America, all disguised as research funding. That night, as I was copying files in his study, I heard Richard's footsteps in the hallway. I'd been so focused on the evidence that I didn't hear him come home early. When our eyes met across the room, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. He knew. Somehow, Richard knew exactly what I'd been doing, and the mask he'd worn for months finally slipped away completely. The next morning, Richard was gone before I woke up, but 2 men in suits were waiting in the living room. They claimed to be doctors, said that Richard was concerned about my mental health, that I'd been acting erratically and needed professional help. I realized with horror that he was trying to have me committed to a psychiatric facility where no one would believe anything I said about him. I grabbed Lily and ran. We escaped through the building's service elevator while the men were searching the bedrooms. I had copies of Richard's files on a flash drive, but everything else, our clothes, our photos, our entire life, was still in that penthouse. We spent that first night in a motel outside the city, Lily asking questions I couldn't answer while I tried to figure out our next move. Richard's power reached everywhere. Within 48 hours, my bank accounts were frozen, my credit cards were cancelled, and somehow I'd been fired from a job I hadn't worked in months. He was erasing me from the system, making it impossible for me to exist in normal society. We moved from motel to motel, paying with cash I'd managed to grab during our escape, always looking over our shoulders. The worst part was watching what this was doing to Lily. My 8-year-old daughter went from living in a penthouse to sleeping in cars, and I couldn't even explain to her why. One night, as she cried herself to sleep in another strange bed, I almost called Richard. I almost gave up, willing to accept whatever punishment he had planned if it meant my daughter could have a normal life again. That moment of weakness nearly cost us everything. But then I realized something that changed the entire game. Richard wasn't hunting me because he was strong. He was hunting me because he was terrified. A man with nothing to hide doesn't go to these lengths to silence someone. He was afraid of what I knew, which meant I had more power than I'd realized. I decided to stop running and make him come to me instead. I leaked just enough information to a journalist to make Richard panic. Hints about the money laundering, questions about missing women, suggestions that someone had evidence of criminal activity at Hayes Industries. Within hours, my phone was ringing. Richard wanted to meet. I chose the location, a restaurant downtown, with plenty of witnesses and security cameras. But the real trap was the recording device I'd sewn into my jacket and the backup phone, streaming everything live to a secure server. Richard thought he was coming to intimidate me into silence one final time. Instead, he walked into a confession booth. "Maya, you don't understand the forces you're playing with," he said, his voice carrying that familiar threat wrapped in false concern. "The people I work with don't leave loose ends. But I can protect you and Lily if you just forget what you think you know." That's when he told me everything. The drug trials, the money laundering, even details about what happened to the women who'd tried to expose him before. He thought he was scaring me into submission, but he was actually giving me everything I needed to destroy him. The FBI agents were waiting outside. I'd been working with them for 2 weeks, ever since I'd contacted a federal prosecutor whose daughter had been affected by Richard's illegal drug trials. When Richard finally realized what was happening, when he saw the agents surrounding the restaurant, the look on his face was worth every terrifying moment of the past 6 months. The hunter had become the prey, and this time there was nowhere left to run. The trial lasted 4 months, and every day I sat in that courtroom watching Richard's empire crumble piece by piece. The evidence I'd gathered became the foundation for a case that exposed corruption reaching into City Hall, state government, and corporate boardrooms across the country. Carmen, Aisha, and the other women finally got their chance to tell their stories, and for the first time in years, people actually listened. The pharmaceutical scandal was even bigger than I'd imagined. Over 300 families came forward with stories of loved ones who'd been hurt or killed by Richard's illegal drug trials. Communities that had suffered in silence for years finally had a voice, and the media couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Hayes Industries collapsed within weeks of Richard's arrest, and investigators found evidence of crimes dating back over a decade. But the victory came with a price. Living through that trial meant reliving every moment of manipulation, every threat, every night I'd lain awake, wondering if Richard would hurt Lily to get to me. There were days when I questioned whether fighting back had been worth the trauma we'd all endured. Then I'd see one of Richard's victims testifying, finding their strength again, and I knew we'd made the right choice. The sentencing hearing was surreal. Richard Hayes, the man who'd once controlled my entire world, looked small and broken as the judge read the charges. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud, and accessory to manslaughter for the people who'd died in his illegal trials. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice served, but it felt strange to realize that the monster who'd haunted my nightmares was just a pathetic man who'd never learned that other people weren't toys for him to break. So here I am, back where this story started, watching Richard being led away in handcuffs for the last time. 6 months ago, I was a scared woman, living in a world that seemed designed to keep people like me powerless. Today, I understand something that Richard never figured out. Real power doesn't come from money or fear or control. It comes from refusing to stay silent when you witness injustice. Lily and I have a new apartment now, nothing fancy, but it's ours. She's back in school, laughing again, asking me about everything except the months we spent running. Kids are resilient in ways that constantly amaze me. She knows her mom fought the bad guy and won, and somehow that's enough for her 8-year-old understanding of the world. I finished my business degree, and now I'm working with a legal aid organization that helps women escape abusive relationships with powerful men. Every week, I meet someone who reminds me of myself 6 months ago. Scared, isolated, convinced that they're powerless against someone with money and influence. I tell them what I learned the hard way. Documentation is everything, allies are essential, and sometimes the person who seems untouchable is actually the most vulnerable of all. The book I'm writing about this experience will be published next year, and all the proceeds are going to a foundation I'm starting for families affected by illegal medical experimentation. Richard thought he could use me and throw me away like all the others, but he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated what happens when you push a mother too far, when you threaten everything she holds sacred. He thought I was weak because I needed his help. He never realized that needing help and being helpless are two completely different things. In the end, his arrogance became his downfall, and my survival became his nightmare. Richard Hayes thought he could prey on women like me because we seemed powerless, but he learned that underestimating someone is the biggest mistake a predator can make. If this story inspired you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your voice matters, your truth matters, and you're stronger than you know. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Until next time, never let anyone make you smaller than you are.